So they're talking about a poverty reduction plan that the Ontario government brought in 2014, and they're talking about how it's fairly ambitious, and they've got poverty advocates here saying that they're pleasantly surprised by the language, but there's a couple of things I want to tweak, and it's a far cry from the kinds of things that you see in a lot of other places, even in Canada. The Liberal government we have in Ontario right now is quite progressive. One of the things they did, for example, is they indexed the minimum wage to inflation, meaning that the minimum wage goes up every year by whatever inflation goes up by, right? So if we have a bad batch of inflation, we have inflation at 10%, then the minimum wage will go up 10%, which will be which is significant, right? Um, I guess on an average year it's going to go up, 10 cents to a quarter or something like that. Although as it rises, it'll be going up more and more and more. Um, but people are saying, I think it's set at about $12 right now. One of the poverty advocates here is like, well, it's set it to 14. And it does make a big difference when you're making small incomes, right? Um, the $2 an hour is a big deal. When you're talking about 12 or 14, it's substantial, right? But I just want to point out how what this really demonstrates is that the minimum wage is something that needs to be set locally. Okay. When she says 14, that's what that is a more of a Toronto specific number, right? What she's doing is she's saying, I'm going to look at the most expensive area in the country, or sorry, in the province, the most expensive area in the province, and I'm going to suggest that we should set it to that, right? So that way everybody gets, what they need, and if you're in poorer areas, um, you'll be that much better off, right? Obviously, the government can't do that, right? What the government is going to do is an average, right? And Ontario is a big province. It's, I mean, if you could, the most populated area between Windsor and Montreal, Montreal's in Quebec, and we're between Detroit and Montreal, right? If you look at a map, kind of up that strip, is about the same size as the eastern seaboard, right? And then there's this huge area off the side that's like, I mean, it's like the entire eastern half of the United States, right? It's a big province. And so you can imagine that, and in fact, there's huge disparities. Um, Toronto is in many ways sort of the exit point of the eastern part of the continent, right? Toronto is, I mean, if you look at North America, and you move out, you've got New York, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Toronto, like it's like and the same thing with Montreal and Ottawa, right? And maybe we could say Ottawa is the exit point because it's a little bit further north, but that part of southern Ontario is very much integrated into the rest of the continent, right? It's just on the other side of the border, but for all basic economic purposes, it's integrated, right? But then when you go up into northern Ontario, up into Thunder Bay or Sudbury, like I believe there's one road that'll take you to Thunder Bay. And if the road is closed, you can't get you've got a helicopter in, right? And in fact, most of the province is only accessible by helicopter. There's no roads. Now you can imagine that. I mean, there's not a lot of economic activity there, right? But I mean, there are some centers there. You've got Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie. Did I say Sudbury or Thunder Bay first? I think I said Sudbury, didn't I? You've got Thunder Bay, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie. You have a lot of small towns even in the south, like Cornwall, Brockville, Kingston, where I am in Windsor, Sarnia. Most of the areas outside Toronto and Ottawa have substantially lower standards of living. Or, sorry, not standards, but costs of living. Standards of living are probably actually higher because the cost of living is lower. So when you work it out as an average, you end up with two things that happen, right? Number one, you end up with the fact that the cost of living outside Toronto and Ottawa, those are the two major centers, the cost of living outside Toronto and Ottawa is lower than it is in Toronto and Ottawa. So that takes the average down. But then the flip side of that is that the cost of living in Toronto, which is like half the province population size, right? Like half the province of Ontario is in the city of Toronto. And a good chunk of the rest of it's in Ottawa, right? Together, they make up something like 70% of the population. So what they do is they boost it up, right? And so the result is that if you're outside of those two major population centers and you're living on disability or on the minimum wage or any sort of lower income situation or poverty level situation, you're way better off outside the cities, right? Because all of the metrics, I mean, the disability is determined by the province using the same sort of thing. The minimum wage is determined by the province. You're way better off because the cost of living is so much lower, and the fact that the cost of living in Toronto is high inflates what it is that you get. The flip side of that is that if you're in Toronto, then you end up poor because the fact that the cost of living outside Toronto is low brings the average down. So what's the answer? Well, if you're outside Toronto, you're probably saying, like I am, you're probably saying, I don't need to change this. This is fine, and it's true. I mean, look at the life that I live, right? I'm vlogging here. You can see the life that I live. It's pretty cushy, right? I've got a nice place to live. I have sufficient spending money. I mean, last month I was, you know, once I got to the sixth concert that month, I had to sell some CDs. That's pretty cushy, right? Um, I don't have a reason for things to change, right? But I moved here. I grew up in Ottawa. I got out of there because the cost of living was higher there, right? I was able to figure that out, right? I mean, not everybody can do that, right? But I mean, if you are outside, you know, but if you're inside one of the major centers, you might want to argue that the minimum wage should be set not by the province, or at least maybe it should be set by the province, but there should also be a city wage that's higher than what the province sets, right? So you have a minimum level of the province and then have a city, right? And so this is kind of, I mean, there's two things to take away from this. Number one, I think that if you're an advocate for this in Ontario, you should be fighting for like a city hall kind of thing, right? Like I say, I don't know if I don't know exactly what the legality of that is. If I remember correctly, I think that actually they would have to pass it at Queen's Park. But you should be looking at rather than having the whole province, because, like I say, if you're living in Windsor, you're probably doing okay on minimum wage. Unless maybe you shouldn't have had the fourth kid. And I'm sorry, but that's reality, right? If you're living on minimum wage and you're living by yourself, then you're doing okay. And if you're living with kids, then I think rather than boost the minimum wage, you should be eligible for subsidies, right? I don't think that it's the market's responsibility to pay for your kids. I think that's government's responsibility, right? But I mean, like, I don't think there's a problem with the minimum wage outside the major cities. There is one inside the major cities, right? So if you're an advocate, let's focus on that. And number two, if you're outside of Ontario, I think that looking at the situation on Ontario can yield a lot of lessons as to, I mean, Ontario is, I'm gonna guess, is probably twice the size of California. I mean, not population size. Population size, there's more people in California than there is in all of Canada. But in terms of like geography size, I'd guess that Ontario is roughly twice the size of California. Okay, so that's to kind of put it in perspective. Um, and then there's lessons to be learned about trying to put a minimum wage down over too large of an area. It has to be specific to the economics of a region, and it has to be local. Um, and I think that if you want real gains real victories, real movements forward, that has to be the way that it's looked at. Is it's a local issue, and there's positive ramifications of that as well. My ass is gonna blow. I gotta go to the bathroom. So sorting through some Facebook events, seeing if anything came up at the last minute that I might want to go to. And I came across this Allied Media Conference, which is something that I had heard of before, but I've never gone to one of them. And I thought, let's take a look through here, see what's actually going on. And I can't say I really looked too deeply into it, but what I did see disappointed me. And this is what I have to say about that. You might expect that I should probably go to the Allied Media Conference in Detroit this month. Sounds like my kind of thing, right? I kind of wanted to post this on their site, but I think it's better if I post it here, and you can bring them here if you'd like. I just don't want to concede the ability to moderate or not moderate. It's a kind of a problem with that part of the political spectrum, is that if they don't like what you have to say, they just delete it, and then they call you names. I do hope that there's enough awareness at this stage to know that their claims are probably frivolous, and that if you get deleted, it's just because they don't like what you have to say, right? Nonetheless, well, I mean, this is what stifling speech does, right? It restricts the discourse. So you learn that you don't begin threads on their space because they will remove them. They can have their circle jerk, right? If you want to actually have a critical discussion, then you need to have it somewhere else. That's I'm not particularly in favor of nasty comments either, but I mean, you have to strike a balance, right? And that balance is not struck there. It's just like I say, if they don't like what you have to say, they just take it down. I think there's enough awareness about that, and this is the consequence. It's not that they have the narrative controlled in a specific way so much as that they're removed from the narrative. It's the age-old lesson that authoritarianism just doesn't work, right? I mean, that's my argument about religion, right? I would actually love to just round up all the religious people and shoot them to the moon. I know that's not going to work, right? Look what happened in Russia, right? They tried to kill them all, and a few generations later they came back stronger than ever. So it's just it doesn't work. You've got to use other tactics, right? Anyways, if you go through the list of events, something should jump out. It seems designed to break people down into tiny little subsets. So that you have the meeting for trans people of color, the meeting for Latinas, the meeting for women of color, the meeting for, dwarfs from islands in the Central Pacific. It's just dwarfism is an island characteristic. So let's not forget this. Right? People from islands are shorter because it's a well-known biological trait. Anyways, and a few meetings that are exclusively geared at white people too, specifically to tell us that we're racists. When I see that, I interpret it as counterproductive. You get all of these people together in the same space to talk about politics, but then you break them down in these tiny little micro demographics. So we all get there, and it's just like, hey, you go over here, you go over here, you go over here. And it is actually, if you read the descriptions, it says, this space is only for women of color. This space is only for trans people, So where's the organizing happening? Where's the, where's the togetherness? Where's the networking? When you go to a rally, that's what the cops do, is they break you up. They break you up before you even get to the rally here. And so if I was going to write the book on how to break up the revolution without a stick, that's pretty much exactly what I'd write. Break them down into divisions, make sure they don't talk to each other, make sure they walk out having seen nothing but their own reflections, and call it shared experiences. Maybe with a heightened sense of isolation. And what else do you get out of walking into a conference like this and only talking to other people that are like you, that look like you, that sound like you, or they can be categorized as statistically similar to you anyways? You should walk out of that place feeling isolated, because the conference was designed to isolate you. Where did the meeting on interracial class struggle? Where does where do you go if you want the Latina to network with, the white guy from Ohio? Where's that meeting? Because that's the meeting I want to go to. I don't want to go to the meeting where everybody's broken down into little pieces. I want to go to the meeting where everybody comes together. But it's not in the list. There's actually an introduction to being a DJ. But there's nothing about bridging divides. Nothing about bridging racial divides. Nothing about bridging gender divides. Nothing about bridging the language divides. Or class divides. It's all about creating divides and then enforcing them. So I'm thinking, what the hell? I don't want to rail against, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a place for trans people to meet and talk to each other. That's fine. But the only thing on the schedule is these broken down micro demographics. What the fuck is up with this? Then I looked a little bit closer. The event has some major sponsors, including the Ford Foundation. Ford Foundation. It's unusual. I've never been to a progressive event with the Ford Foundation putting money into it before. I know that the Ford Foundation puts a lot of money into kind of fake progressive events, not real grassroots organizations, right? And as soon as I saw that, I realized what was going on. What do you think the Ford Foundation wants out of an event like this? Do you think the Ford Foundation wants to fund seminars on class struggle? No, the Ford Foundation wants to break you up into little pieces so you don't get any bad ideas. They want to put you in a room by yourself. Rather, I might suggest it with the Ford Foundation as well as Google. What would Google want? They're funding it through their functional Mozilla subsidiary. What would they want? They want data. Okay? That's what Google always wants. And then when you piece that together, you should see why that makes sense. Because that's what an advertising company does, right? Breaking you down into micro demographics before the event starts and sending you off which way or that way. Trans people go over here, Latinos go over here, Africans go over here. That doesn't really help in building connections or any kind of revolutionary politics. But it does help an advertising company. That's exactly what an advertising company would want. Would be to break you down into these little categories so they can study you and figure out ways to sell things to you. So what do I think this event's actually going to be like? I think that once they break you down into these tiny little groups, they're going to ask you a lot of questions, and then there's going to be people in the back of the room taking notes, filming it. They've got it on microphones, audio recordings, and it's all about collecting data. I did pull one thing out that looked a little bit interesting. It was a workshop on the peer-to-peer sharing economy. Sounds like kind of an anarchist thing. Maybe I might meet some anarchists there. It would be nice. I haven't really met any anarchists since I moved to Windsor. It's hard enough to find them in Ottawa. But on second glance, what came out was the likelihood that it's a focus group to unveil an advertising strategy. The white website had venture capitalist all over it. So they've got big money coming into a quote-unquote sharing economy thing because that's the buzzword nowadays, right? That's not when you've got money pouring in from the Ford Foundation. Nobody's sharing anything except profits, and you're probably not in on it. So you need to be careful with this shit, okay? This isn't real. And don't be fooled into thinking that it is. What I think that a lot of the reactionary right fails to realize is that a great deal of what they're railing against is really corporate advertising. Marketing strategies to gather data. And there's a lot of people that get sucked into it, looking for something better, right? World's a shitty place, the way that we've set up the economy, the way that we get people fighting against each other. It's, I can have some empathy for people that are looking for something else, and this is a kind of a net that they put out to catch people that are falling, right? But it's not outside of the system so much as it's just a way to enforce it, right? Kind of the rubber padding that they use to catch you and push you back in, right? And it's been my experience that that's ultimately what happens with everybody, almost. There's kind of a subset of people that they keep out, right? To an extent, I fall into that category. To an extent, I don't. But I pulled myself out. But this isn't a revolutionary discourse. This is an advertising strategy. Sorry. I just want to point something out about the bootstraps argument. The pull yourself up by your own bootstraps argument that they're throwing around here. As I've mentioned a few times, the host of this show is a little bit to the right of the Canadian spectrum, which is not. He's not Bill O'Reilly. He's he's not even Chris Matthews. He's probably more like Cenk Uygur, but that's to the right of the Canadian spectrum, right? So. And they're talking about, I mean, everybody on there's like 6 people here, and everybody on the panel is ganging up on him, which is what usually happens on this show, which is why it's tolerable, right? So you got this guy, and he's the only conservative in the room, right? Consistently. So you walk away from it thinking, the host of this show's a jerk. But I mean, part of the reason why is because he's consistently arguing with people to his left, right? And often getting badly ganged up on, which is what's happening here. But I just what I want to point out is that I think he may have been creating one of the panelists here. I think it was that guy, or it might have been one of the other guys. He may have been creating a bit of a straw man around the idea of the whole bootstrap pulling thing, right? But the reaction that the host provided was, see, the guest pointed out that a lot of people have the misunderstanding that the pull yourself up by your own bootstrap approach, the sort of hands-off government approach, is more fiscally responsible. When in fact, and again, this is why Canadian Liberals are so successful, is because they get the math, and they know that the studies actually indicate that that approach is more expensive than putting money down up front, right? And it's partly because of the way the system is designed, right? Like we have universal health care here, for example. We have government-run food banks, all these sorts of things, right? So when you take that into account, it costs less money, to put into the social systems, to put into addictions treatment, housing services, it will cost taxpayers less in the long run if they just take the homeless guy off the street. They put him up somewhere. They put him through addictions counseling. That is cheaper than letting him out in the street and then having to pay for hepatitis. He's got frostbite because he's out in the cold. Um, ends up breaking and entering. He's got to go through court costs. All that kind of stuff. On a per person basis, that they do. Canadians do this math. It's a part of our public policies. Our governments figure this stuff out, and they base their policies on what the math says. And what the math says is that if you're really concerned about taxpayer money, it makes more sense to deal with it beforehand rather than deal with the consequences of it. Um, it's not that I think that I think most Americans understand that, but you'll never get your government to follow through with it. Um, in Canada, the government is pushing it constantly, right? Um, we don't need to yell at our governments to do this because they know better and they just do it, right? Um, but the reaction that we got from the host on that was kind of a sour look, um, indicating that he was conceding. He knew that it was right, but he didn't like it, right? And I think that that's kind of maybe a misperception that a lot of liberals have. Um, when you're arguing conservatives might want to throw out numbers, right? And they might make it think that that's what it's about. And I think that maybe the plot has been lost somewhere over the last 40 years. I actually think that the reason why conservatives throw numbers at you is because they expect you to throw numbers at them. Liberals kind of don't do that as much as they used to. If you go back, 60, 70 years ago, it was the liberals that had all the data, had all the numbers. They were consistently, and I mean, depending on where you go, they still do, right? But, um, they had all the economic arguments on their side. They were constantly pushing economic models. They had the mainstream of science and everything on their side, right? And I mean, they still do, but they were very forceful about it, right? Nowadays, it's the right that's doing that all the time, right? And they're citing sketchy sources, right? They want to throw their mises at you, right? That sketchy source, sketchy source, right? But they'll do it, right? And then they'll gather because they have all these think tanks, and maybe that's really probably the biggest thing that's changed is where the money goes, right? 60 years ago, you had the Rockefellers and you had the Fords, when they were sticking all kinds of money into all kinds of things, right? Nowadays, all the money is coming from the Cox and the and etc. And they're putting money into into your heritage institutes and whatnot. So that's where the studies come from. That's where the data arises it from, right? And so you end up with conservatives throwing around all these numbers. A lot of times it's nonsense, but liberals have kind of adopted the position of like we're not gonna go down this route because we know that you're not gonna be honest, right? It's kind of a cut your losses strategy, right? Um, Liberals might realize that they're right, and that if we're going to have a serious discussion about numbers, then it'll come out. But most of the time, we're not going to have a serious discussion about numbers. We're going to be throwing around a lot of propaganda, and your conservative opponent is probably engaging in outlandish demagoguery. They're not just throwing around false data. They know they're throwing around false data. They're openly lying to you, but they're trying to convince you through, and then you've got an audience in front of you, and they don't really know which one's right and which one's wrong. So liberals have adopted a tactic, and I guess this is since 85 or so, of just like, we're not going to do this, right? We'll let, you know, we'll let the smart kids do their own research and figure it out on their own. We're not going to give you a platform to, confuse the ignorant with, right? And so now when you have a liberal throw numbers out there like that, Um, this is kind of the reaction you get. But like I say, I think it's more like I think that the guy was expecting the host to react positively to the numbers and say, okay, well, if the numbers say this, then this is what we should do, right? And he seems to have it in his mind that winning an argument with the conservative is really just a question of showing them, showing them the money, showing them the data, right? Um, but that's not what he got, right? Like I say, and I just went over why that's maybe an inversion of the truth, but what he actually got was a kind of a, okay, you're right, but what about the moral issue? And that's really what you're fighting with conservatives, right? You can show them all the data in the world, all the numbers. You can come up with the best economic arguments you can come up with. There's still ultimately the feeling of a lack of contribution, right? The idea that it's not fair for society to compensate, you know. And even beyond the fairness, there's the idea that I don't want to, right? I worked hard to get where I got to, and I don't want to share. Even if in the long run, you know, I'll spend a little money if it. I'll spend, I'm okay with the public funds being siphoned out a little bit heavier if it means that we're not engaging in this kind of socialism, right? And so there's the philosophical aspect to it. It just jumped out at me here. It just became obvious. The liberal guy had it. He nailed it. He had him nailed, right? Just absolutely like there's no debate. Like you lose, right? But it didn't really convince him because that's not really what the issue was, right? It wasn't really about the money. It was about the perception of things and the idea of just not liking government as um, as a distributive agent, right? That's why well, maybe I should just leave it at that. But so something to keep in mind when you're arguing with conservatives, and I've spent so much time arguing with the right. I can picture I can picture it like this out. Okay? Um, a lot of times, you might be surprised to see where things are really sitting with them. Um, in most cases, like I say, I do think the data. Um, well, I mean, if you really know how to how to read numbers, if you really know data, you know that they're always wrong, right? If you look at the historical record, they're always wrong. And that's what it is. It's a facade. They throw numbers around because they're trying to convince you, not because they believe them themselves. And so they come up with these arguments that half the time they don't even really understand because they think that that's the tool they need to convince liberals. And liberals have got kind of lost the plot on it. You don't convince a conservative with data. You got to get to their hearts, right? Because that's how they think, really, right? It's the cold scientific liberals that need the scientific method, not the at heart religious fundamentalist conservatives, right? So now they're talking about whether increasing welfare creates a disincentive to work. I don't think that that's a smart question. Um, because most of the time the disincentive is already there, right? Would So we have to be careful how we phrase this. Is it the case that making welfare livable will remove certain people from the job market? Um, yeah, I'd say it probably would. Certainly would. It would remove me. If I had the choice between working and not working, I mean, I don't currently have that choice, right? I don't have the choice to work. I'm disabled. But if I did have the choice between working and not working, I would choose not working, and I would accept a very low level of income to do it, right? Um, I currently have quite a bit of a disposable income, um, and I'm using it. But if I didn't, that wouldn't. I'm not the kind of person that would go to work, so I have more disposable income. I would find other ways to exist. Okay, so but you have to keep in mind that that's not a cause so much as it's a reaction, right? The reason is because I'm somebody that would only go to work because they have to pay their bills. It's the only reason I would ever want to go to work, or I wouldn't even. It's not even a reason I would want to go to work. It would be a reason I'd be forced to go to work, right? So I'm in a category of people that is um, involuntarily that would be involuntarily employed. Okay, um, that's a small group of people, and so the better question to ask is the market better off when people that are engaging in it involuntarily are given an exit strategy? And I think the answer to that is yes. Um, the economy is not able to produce full employment, right? I think we all agree with that. Even we might even go so far as to suggest that full employment, quote unquote, is like 3 or 4% unemployment, right? It's obviously not full employment. There's still people unemployed. But these are people that are structurally unemployed. These are people that are unemployed by choice, and etc. Right? Um, and as so long as there are more workers than jobs, and the economy is designed that way, it is beneficial, I would argue, to the market, to employers, to consumers, to everybody, to have people that just don't want to be there. All right, to just let them go. All right. What would it be like if you were to force me to go to work? Well, I'd probably be late most days. I'd be probably do a crappy job. Um, I'd be trying to get fired most of the time. Um, it's see people just don't really get it because, like I say, they're in the cave. Um, they are stuck uh, in a concept of existence that um, and we're not gonna. There's not really any point in walking down this path. But they're just not able to see what freedom actually is, and so they accept a kind of happiness in their slavery, right? And they're not able to understand that there are people out there that you would literally like you would have to put me in chains, okay? I'm not going to fall for this. I mean, there's been a lot written by about this idea that something that happened around the turn of the century was that the elite realized that you couldn't put people in physical chains, so you had to create mental chains around them instead. I'm sorry, but I'm somebody that has broken those mental chains, and if you want to get me to work, you got to put me in physical chains. All right, you got to drag me in. You're probably going to have to beat me up on the way there. I'm going to resist. I'm going to lie on the ground. You have to drag me by the foot. Like it's I don't want to be there, right? Now I'm a little bit extreme, but even if you can take me down a notch, okay, to somebody that just isn't, you know, they'll come in, if their shift starts at 8, they'll be there at 7:59. They don't talk to anybody. I don't want to be there. They do their stupid job, and they go home. Productivity levels are not very good because they're just pushing buttons. Their head's somewhere else. Who are these people? Who are these people that go to work but don't want to go to work, or would have to be dragged to work and refuse to go, or any of these sorts of things? We're artists mostly. I mean, that's what we really are, right? We're anarchists, but I mean anarchists that have goals that are more aligned with the society. We'll find somewhere to exist in it, right? So you can call yourself an anarchist, but if you really want to be a nurse, you'll find a job as a nurse, and you'll find some structure and happiness in it, and that's fine. But when you're an artist, there's nowhere in our society for art. I mean, commodified garbage that people call art, but it's not art. And so what you're doing when you're doing that is you're allowing artists to escape from the market. And there's two benefits. It's really mutually beneficial. Okay, it's beneficial for the artists because they have space and time to do what they want, and it's beneficial to the rest of society because you're taking them out of a role that they're not interested in, and are inevitably going to underperform in, and you're letting somebody else that is more excited about it do it, right? So yes, it might reduce labor participation rates for a small subset of the population, but people are better off that way. And it might be something in the short run as well, right? Because if you give artists the ability to make something, then they're more likely to succeed, right? The more time you give an artist, the better their product is, the more likely it is that it sells. And in the end, they might not end up with, a traditional job, but they may end up being self-sufficient in a different kind of way, right? And it's a wide variety of things that way, right? So again, though, are you going to convince a conservative with this argument? Probably not, because they have to change how they think about things, right? Artist subsidies? You're going to convince a conservative for artist subsidies? Because I mean that's what it functionally boils down to, right? I mean, you might end up with the odd drunk that but I mean at the same time, right? It's just like, okay, if you're going to be a hopeless drunk, does it benefit an employer to hire you? Drink yourself to death, and I mean, the guy made the argument for services and stuff, for addiction counseling, and that's great and everything, but it's but if you're talking about the jobs, then it doesn't make sense to it doesn't make sense to send the drunk to work while you have somebody else on welfare. It makes sense to let the drunk live on welfare and send the guy that's on welfare to work. It makes sense to let the artists out because they don't want to be there. The authors, the musicians, the sculptors, whatever, painters. And if you let them live, let them make, the number of people, so that's one group, right? The next group would be people that just want money to spend. And if they want money to spend, then I mean they're always going to be better off working, right? Because they're always going to have more money that way, right? So for them, it's just a question of maximizing income or maximizing utility. I guess you could call them the utilitarians, right? I guess that's maybe the best way to, or maybe not utilitarians, but people that want to maximize utility, right? They don't have to be utility monsters quite, but and they're always going to want to work because they'll always have more money, and they're always going to want to have a better job because they're always going to want more money. So whether you can get out of it or not isn't going to make any difference to them because it's not what they want, and that's the vast majority of people, right? The number of people that are going to take advantage of it just to sit around in their underwear and watch Oprah, or sit around in their underwear and watch TVO and comment on a whoa. Um, the number of people that are going to do that is very small. No, I'm an artist. I have a large discography. It's in flux right now. It's coming. Actually, there'll be in a few days. There'll be some stuff up. So I mean, it will take some people out of the labor force. Sure, it's better. Everybody's better off that way, right? Um, it gives people an opportunity to do that, right? It lets the people that want out get out, and then opens up spaces for people that want in. The result is you're going to see an increase in productivity. You're going to see, you know, more potential at the lower rungs of the labor force, and I think you'll probably also see an increase in artistic output because you're giving artists the space to make, to create, which is what they want, right? And it might be low probability, but you will see some artists succeed too, right? Um, Again, like I say, you're going to convince a conservative. Well, it's a reordering of society, right? It's almost more like a like we haven't had societies like that. Like it's in a certain sense it's anti-democratic, right? And it is. Um, but I do think it's more conducive to freedom, right? It's the kind of society that would have existed like before the French Revolution in a certain sense. And I mean, I think everybody gets that. But at the same time, it's you know, as an artist, yeah, let me out. But I'm not I'm not doing anybody any favors by going to work. Trust me. So there was a primary in California on June 7th as well after the fact. I was doing a bit of blogging, live blogging, kinda, not really. It's more just a series of posts. Take my Google profile here, and I'm going to read them off to you in sequence. There's quite a few of them here. I don't know how long this is going to put me through for, but let's go. First thing I'm looking at is initial results in New Jersey are 55%. It's a little low. That's what I'm thinking. So I'm looking at New Jersey and I'm thinking this is an open primary. Sanders has done well in open primaries since March. And, if New York was an open primary, he would have done a lot better. If Pennsylvania was an open primary, he would have done a lot better. So, all of these projections that are saying she's going to run away with New Jersey, that didn't add up to me. The only open primary in the area that would be remotely close to New Jersey would be Rhode Island. And he won Rhode Island. And the fact that it was an open primary is probably not a coincidence. And the fact that he won Rhode Island. So I'm thinking there's a really substantial possibility that there could be a big upset in New Jersey. I'm looking at the initial results. 55%, well, our initial numbers should be better than that. In a close, I mean, she did better than that in the closed primaries. If she's only getting 55% at the very beginning, you'd have to think that, once all the independents show up, it's going to cut into that. So you have to keep in mind how this works, right? Hillary always jumps out ahead on mail-ins. It's predictable. And it shouldn't be, by the way. That's a strong predictor for fraud. But that's what happens. And then Bernie catches up on the day of. It's not a pattern you should see. It's a pattern that suggests that something dishonest is happening. But if she's only getting 55%, if she can't cross 60, you should maybe expect it to be close. And I do think there's a reason to expect they'd fuck up the demographic modeling. It's like they did in Michigan, right? What they had was closed primary data, and they tried to plug it into an open primary, right? So if, for example, you took data from New York and you used the data in New York to build the model in New Jersey, that would be an error in modeling, right? Because New Jersey would be an open primary, and New York was a closed one, so that would not be a right way to try to predict the results in New Jersey. I was never suggesting that Rhode Island was a great predictor for New Jersey, but it was the closest thing that existed. Which again wouldn't be saying necessarily that he was going to win. There was no polling to suggest that he was going to. But what I'm saying is that when you get a poll like that, it's modeled, right? It's not just a straight poll. They have to fit it to the demographic data and what they project the outcome to look like, right? But how do you guess what the outcome looks like? You look at the states around it, right? But that didn't mean I was suggesting he was going to win. I was just suggesting that you shouldn't be surprised if it's closer than expected. Some time carried on, and the numbers didn't come close. And I look at that and I think, geez, that's really disappointing. Jersey was an open primary in a liberal state. You can say what you want about the dynamics walking into the situation, with the AP calling it last night, and it seeming like she's going to win. So, all these kinds of things adding up. But an inability to split in a liberal state like New Jersey suggests that the party has made a choice one way or the other. Again, I really think that Sanders should have done well in New Jersey. And the fact that he didn't is, you can make an excuse one way or the other. It's pretty final, right? Last day of voting, he can't win New Jersey. That's a bit of a slight, right? It suggests that it's done. And whether it's because people have resigned themselves to it or what, the fight's done, right? But that doesn't mean I'm going to be posting positive things about Hillary Clinton. What it really means is I'm mostly going to be just tuning out altogether. I have weekly endorsed Jill Stein. And I just need to reiterate that I don't think Hillary Clinton should be president. I think she should be tried at The Hague for war crimes and sentenced appropriately. Disappointed, but not exaggerating. And just to follow up on that thought, I'm saying the party's made a choice, right? And I'm rejecting that choice from Canada. Does that make me some kind of a sore loser or something? No, it doesn't. Because I was never a supporter of the party in the first place. See, and this is going to drive a lot of Democrats nuts, right? There's going to be a substantial number of people that simply aren't going to fall in line here. And the media will throw around all kinds of accusations of treason at them and scratch their head and not understand. Do you want Trump to win? Well, we're not Democrats. Okay? We never really wanted to be Democrats. A lot of us have spent our entire lives protesting against Democrats, rhetorically and in some cases more than rhetorically. In a normal year, we would never even consider the Democrats as a serious option. And for me, that's certainly the case. In the last 20 years, I've never really considered the Democrats seriously, except in 2004. This is John Kerry. Support for Sanders was really just a pragmatic decision to support a candidate that was really way to the right of where we actually are. And even with Sanders, it's true. Sanders is well to my right. But he had a serious chance of winning, and he was a lesser evil, right? I know that a lot of Democrats, or people that call themselves left-leaning Democrats, like made me laugh, right? People that call themselves that will say, well, Clinton is a lesser evil. I supported Sanders, but Clinton was a lesser evil, so no. For me, I'm outside of the spectrum, but Sanders is a lesser evil, so I will compromise in supporting Sanders. It's just like, let's shift a little here, right? And now that it's evaporated, like, I'm not going to all of a sudden become a Democrat and support the wars and the market ideology. I've spent my whole life fighting against that. Or from Canada arguing against it, or bashing my head up against the wall as a consequence of it. Again, the American spectrum doesn't make any sense. That's really the issue here, okay? These are people that are way outside the Democratic Party. But there's not an option for them to support. There's no socialist option. It's a huge number of people that do not vote because they're disenfranchised. And Sanders was offering, a weak enfranchisement, but an enfranchisement nonetheless. When you take Sanders out, they're now disenfranchised again. Okay? There's not even a watered down socialist option. The Green Party's it's a liberal party, right? Nobody should be surprised that there's so many disenfranchised people when you only offer two options. You have more options for mustard in the store than you have for voting options at the booth. Bernie's legacy can't be in helping Hillary win. He can't seriously turn around and endorse her. It's ridiculous. It's a non-option, right? It's not like 2008 where you had Obama and Clinton basically identical candidates. Now, I know a lot of Obama supporters will bristle against that, but if you look at their policy positions, there was almost no difference between Obama and Clinton. A lot of people really badly projected false positions onto Obama, right? They didn't really know where Obama stood. But if you were really paying closer attention, you should have seen that there really wasn't much of a difference. This is not like that at all. It's a completely different situation. Sanders represents an entirely different political philosophy, an entirely different political history, an entirely different political culture. So you cannot talk about Sanders endorsing Clinton being anything at all like Clinton endorsing Obama. There's simply no comparison. It's more like Clinton's, endorsing McCain. In fact, I desperately hope that he doesn't, because he'll instantly become irrelevant if he does. Okay, this isn't Bernie can deliver. Bernie is not going to pull those votes in. At the end of the day, the Democrats are Democrats, and Democrats that supported Bernie will support Hillary, right? She was winning by large margins amongst Democrats, So she won, I think, if you add it up, she probably won something like 65 to 35 with Democrats overall. So she'll bring back that 35. But she lost by roughly that margin to independents. And that 65% of independents, she's going to pull very few of them, right? When you work it out, it's what? Less than half of 30, something like 10% when you work it out. That's what he had to play with in the first place, right? Or 10% of, I guess it's probably about 5%, because it's 10% of the half of that vote for Democrats. It's probably not going to swing the election, okay? But if he does that, he kills himself. Bernie's legacy has to be the construction of an independent socialist movement in the United States, okay? That has to be what Bernie or bust really means. And in the process, we'll have to see who aligns with the establishment and who doesn't. Don't be tricked. Trump is the same as Clinton. Clinton is the same as Obama. Obama is the same as Bush, and Bush is the same as Gore. The only breath of fresh air in there was Kerry, and it was because his war policy was different. And then a little bit more time went on. And I need to talk about what it is that I did wrong in my analysis of New Jersey. Regarding my error in analysis, it's hard to say much with the canceled exit polling. I mean, the polls in New Jersey were fairly accurate in the end. I just didn't trust the polling. Less because I thought they were doing something wrong, and more because I thought they'd been paid off. So I'm looking at the polling. I don't trust the polling firms to be outside of the grip of the Democratic Party's corruption. They get paid, right? Polling firms don't operate out of the goodness of their heart. I worked for a polling firm for a while that was taking dirty money from the Conservative Party in Canada. It happens. It's a thing that happens, okay? I don't think my logic was wrong, but I'll point out that it looks like turnout in New Jersey in 2016 is going to be less than it was in 2008. We're not going to get exit polls, but if we did have them, I think we'd learn the flux of independence that Bernie needs and was able to get in Rhode Island, just didn't show up at the polls. So if you go back a little bit, I was talking about, the early results were coming in, but then when all of the independents come in, those independents just didn't come in. You can come up with reasons why, but that seems to be what happened. It might not be precisely due to the AP's declaration last night, but it may be a consequence of widespread perception that the race was over, so why bother? Or it might be, some more voter suppression. Who knows, right? You can twist the logic around either way, right? But old people are more likely to vote than young people. Young people need the movement. Old people don't. Further partisans are more likely to vote than independents. To suggest otherwise is just a bad argument. Okay, it would fly in the face of all data we have for all time. The entire history of data on this topic suggests that, right? So if Clinton is drawing old partisans who would vote through a nuclear attack, and Sanders is drawing young independents who, in truth, might be more interested in a TV show, it's not a contest, right? It's the story of the century. Young people don't vote, okay? We knew that in 1960. We know that today. It's just that doesn't happen, right? Without exit polling, I am guessing, but the turnout numbers implicitly suggest that Sanders' strength bailed on him in New Jersey, which would have the effect of approximating a close primary, right? So we can't say for sure what happened in New Jersey because we don't have the exit polling, but we can look at the turnout numbers and we can say, well, turnout is actually down this year over 2008. We know that in order for Sanders to win, he has to have high turnout. It's pretty obvious what happened, right? But the thing is that normally, in an open primary, we have high turnout, and it's in the closed primaries that we have the low turnout. So, how did we get that? Who knows? If it was, it could have been apathy, or it could have been cheating. We'll never know. But we know that the racist models managed to fluke out one last time because the low turnout, what the racist models did was they modeled it based on low turnout. What I did was I modeled it based on high turnout, or mentally modeled it. I wasn't running numbers. I was just saying, okay, But then we see low turnout. So again, I've been saying this the whole time through. His models, or I'm saying his, but like the various models that we've seen come out that are trying to use demographic modeling like this, they should have been very wrong. But, through a combination of, I hope it's a combination of luck. I hope there wasn't collusion. And some more time went by. And I just want to reflect again on this not supporting Clinton thing. What is the demographic? What does that person look like, sound like? What are you dealing with here? Well, I've been over this before. And again, I have to point out for probably the fifth time in this comment that I'm a Canadian. And I can't vote in the United States. Okay, but I just want to put down an idea of the demographic that you can expect is tuning out or voting for the Greens. I'm a caricature. I have an exaggeration. Canadians, on average, are more liberal, and what I'm saying here reflects that. But how would I have voted in previous American elections if I could have? Like I say, in 2016, it seems like I'm going to support the Greens, but I'm probably just going to not care anymore. In 2012, I paid almost no attention at all. Really, I didn't. I was in school at the time, or just getting out of school. I was studying law for this semester. I was writing law essays. I'd been and drinking with Occupy activists. That's what I was doing in 2012, primary and electoral season. I remember being revolted by Paul Ryan, but that's about the only real memory I have of that cycle. I remember some of the essays that I wrote. I remember some of the nights I spent out drinking, but I don't remember the election. I was not interested. And it was largely because I interpreted Mitt Romney as being everything that Barack Obama always wished he was. It was a farce. The issue in the election was Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, which was written by the opponent. It was the most ridiculously farcical election that I've ever seen. I would have voted for Jill Stein had I voted at all. In 2008, I did initially support Clinton. It was based largely on the strength of her more progressive healthcare plan and memories of her role as a peace advocate, like in the Good Friday Agreement, which is something that she should actually be proud of. I know that some people try to hit her on that, but she should have pushed back a little harder on that. I think the reason she didn't push back is because she wanted to be seen as a hawk. But I wanted to see her as a dove, right? I'll admit I was maybe a little bit out to lunch on that, but I don't think I was the only one, right? And it was always fairly tepid. I would never say, I wasn't a strong Clinton supporter. I think it was more that I was very opposed to Obama, and I was. I was not fooled by him, not for a second. I was in the empty suit choir. And I think that the people that were calling him an empty suit turned out to be right. He was a front for the banks. Okay, it was clear from the start. All the talk about money coming from Goldman Sachs, that's not something that happened like after the election, right? That was all over the blogosphere from the start. And if you knew where to look, then you could see it. And people knew it, right? Where did all the money come from? It came from bankers. And everybody knew it. Or everybody that knew to look to find out knew it, right? And by the time November had come around, it was pretty clear that if I was going to vote at all, I would have voted for Ralph Nader. But I probably actually would not have bothered voting. I think I probably would have actually voted for Jill Stein in 2012. I don't think I would have voted at all in 2008. And that was the year, with the big rallies and everything else. I was not excited at all. Some of the music that I wrote at the time reflected that. And it was just feeling, like listening to Obama speak, it was all this rhetoric about competition, and I just, all this talk about him being a great orator, and, all this rhetoric, I didn't find much to connect to in his talking at all. He just struck me as yet another, dime a dozen, neoliberal globalist. I didn't find his speeches exciting at all. I found them very deflating. After all those years of Bush, and then this is what we get. I was not at all excited by Barack Obama. But I did actively support John Kerry in 2004. It was based largely on his less aggressive foreign policy. Um, he's been a lot less belligerent as Secretary of State than anybody in recent memory. I may even endorse Clinton if she promises to keep Kerry in his position. I think he's done a relatively good job. Relatively. A lot of shit out there, right? My first choice for the leader of the Greens in 2000 was Jello Biafra. I'm a big Dead Kennedys fan. But I would have enthusiastically voted for Nader in 2000. Kerry was a lot more of a dove than Gore was, and I was aware of that. I was aware that Gore was a warmonger, and that Kerry was not. And that's the difference. Had they run Kerry in 2000, I probably would have voted for him. Or if I was in the States, I would have voted for him. And when we go back to 1996, I'm underage. I'm 15. I would trace my political awakening to propaganda surrounding the bombing of Serbia. So it's not just that I'm underage, it's that I'm not really politically aware. And given that I was vaguely liberal, listening to Pearl Jam records and stuff, I probably would have voted for Clinton. So I'm hardly a defining demographic. I'm a caricature of a defining demographic, but I do exist. And if you're curious about my actual voting record in Canada, well, I voted for the Liberals under Jean Chrétien in 2000. It was his third mandate, his third majority in a row. I think the big thing that he planned to do there was legalize marijuana. Got blocked at the last minute. I voted for the NDP in 2004. That was a vote against Paul Martin. If you understand Canadian politics, that was Paul Martin was a finance minister in the 90s. He was widely seen as to the right of the Liberal Party. So that was a vote for the left to punish the Liberals for swinging right. In hindsight, I think that Paul Martin's reputation as a conservative is somewhat unfair. I may have been mildly misinformed, and I do kind of regret this. I voted for Jack Layton again in 2006. And again, I think that that wasn't the best choice. Not just because Martin, I think, got a bad reputation, but I don't think Jack Layton was the progressive Jesus that he seemed to be at the time either. Not that I never saw him that way anyways. It was just more of it was a lesser evil calculation, but at the same time, I'm not, the way that things ended up turning out, I would have voted for Martin both years if I could have seen the future. Right? There was this kind of perception that the Conservatives couldn't win. Right? So it was okay to vote for the NDP because the Conservatives can't win. But then I voted for the Liberals in 2008, which was the year that Stéphane Dion was running for Prime Minister. He ran under a Green Party platform, carbon tax, Green Shift, they called it. It was a very progressive platform. He got nailed by Stephen Harper on it, but I thought it was. His campaign was very poorly run. There were a lot of very cringeworthy moments in it. We don't need to go over that right now, but I did vote for Stéphane Dion, and I don't regret that. I would do it again. Part of the biggest reason that I regret not voting for Paul Martin is because Michael Ignatieff ended up coming in. Had I known that voting against Paul Martin would result in Michael Ignatieff, I would have left Martin in place for the 2000s. The hope was that the Liberals would lean left, not that they would bring in this crazy right-wing nutcase named Michael Ignatieff, who amazingly, the guy was running a human rights center at Harvard, and he backs the Iraq War. I mean, it would have been. I mean, the general perception in Canada was that any political aspirations that he had in Canada were done the moment that he voted for the Iraq War. Um, I think he probably should have saved everybody the headache and just stayed there, you know. And in hindsight, I don't regret voting against Michael Ignatieff at all. Um, but by the time 2015 came around, it's not even the Liberals had swung further left. They reoriented themselves to the center, but the NDP, which was the Jack Layton party, Jack Layton died of cancer in between there, and they replaced him with a guy that's just he was a right-wing Liberal cabinet minister in Quebec, so he swung the party right away to the right, and so all of a sudden the Liberals don't look so bad in comparison anymore. So I voted for Trudeau. So I'm a swing voter in Canada. I'm between the NDP and the Liberals, right? Which would mean that I'm to the left of Sanders, right? Sanders would be he'd be on the right of the NDP, right? Sanders is maybe right in the split, right? Which for me, I mean, like I'm not like my actual political space is well to the left of the Canadian spectrum, even. But I find myself as a swing voter. One may expect me to, if I would identify as a New Democrat before I would identify as a liberal, right? I'd identify as an anarcho-communist, right? But I mean, I find myself voting for the Liberals as often, if not more often, because the NDP has been very disappointing through my lifetime. I read history books. I see that they were better in the past, but in my lifetime, the NDP has been disappointing. And I have voted exclusively for the Liberals at the provincial level, which would be votes for either Dalton McGuinty or Kathleen Wynne. So that's what I am. I'm going to switch my batteries here. This has been going on for almost a half an hour now, and the light's up. But I'm useful as a swing voter in Canada. I make sense to study and analyze, but I'm off the spectrum in the United States. Okay, I'm not a good profile of a Sanders voter at all. I'm a caricature of a Sanders voter. I'm an exaggeration of one. I'm actually even off the spectrum in Canada. Yeah, so I gotta stop this for a second. So still more time has gone on, and everybody's wondering when is Sanders going to concede, and he doesn't. And a minor crisis erupts. I say no. Listen. I didn't expect Sanders to follow the expected path. I do not expect Sanders to concede until the last superdelegate votes at the convention. Is the election over? Yeah, it is. Okay, but that doesn't matter. And I know this is strange for Americans, but it's not so strange from the perspective of somebody raised with a three-party spectrum. The question is not whether he'll concede before the convention. He won't. Stop. He won't. The question is whether he'll concede after the convention. That is whether or not he will run as an independent. So let's be clear. You want to ask when he'll give up and support Clinton. That's not the right question. The question you need to ask is if he'll give up and support Clinton. This goes back to what I've been saying about how Sanders is representative of a different tradition than Hillary Clinton. People raised around the American political spectrum are going to be confused about this. There's two parties, right? He can't win. Why fight? Because he's not a Democrat. Okay, that's the actual truth of it. Now let's go way back. Okay, these are both older people, right? Everybody can see that everybody can see that Sanders is an old man. He's 74 years old. He'll be 75 by November. I think maybe it's a little bit less realized that Clinton is also 69 years old, right? So these are both old people. They're both septuagenarians. So their defining periods go back to a good period of time before now, right? These are people that were defined in the 1950s and 1960s. Now, what was a Democrat in the 1950s? Let's let's understand that Clinton herself was not a Democrat in the 1950s or the 1960s. She wasn't a Democrat until the 1970s. She was a Republican at the time. Um, and what was Sanders? Sanders would have been a self-identified socialist at the time. And this is an era where there is a socialist party. There's a Red Scare. It's a period where Democrats represent something very, very different than socialists do. And recognizing that it took Sanders, 55 years of his life before, 75 years of his life before he was willing to actually identify as a Democrat. Like, it's if you put this into context, like I say, this is a lot easier for me because I come from a society where there is a center left and a left. Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat. That's the actual truth of it, okay? Now, I think everybody can see that the answer is that he will eventually support Clinton, okay? But I don't think that he's completely decided yet that he will. The entire setup, everything he's done here is to facilitate a third-party run. Listen to what he says. Listen to what he says carefully. He says things like, I'll support Clinton if she supports single-payer health care. Do you think that Hillary Clinton will support single-payer health care? I sure don't. So what he's saying is that he's never going to support her. And it's not random rhetoric. That's calculated. That's stated like that for a reason. Now, in the end, he might not follow through with it, right? But he's talking like that to keep the option open. So let's get the question right. It is reasonable to conclude that his apprehension about Trump is too great, if that's what he's broadcasting. But don't take it for granted, because that's also what he's broadcasting. This is hard-nosed political tactics, okay? Let's go back in time. The reality is that FDR, who was a Democrat, wouldn't have moved an inch without the threat of a popular movement from the socialist parties, which is where Sanders is. Okay? If this is the 1930s, when you're talking about the last depression, you would have had Clinton representing the establishment Democrats, and you would have had Sanders on the outside representing the union movements, right? And Sanders would have been threatening Clinton with her political life, and demanding that she give in or else. Now, we don't have that union movement today, but that's the way he's thinking. He's not thinking about sucking up to her. Okay, he's thinking about scaring the hell out of her, and because he knows that that's the only way that he'll get her to move on anything, is by making her think that she'll lose. It's not like the coverage is naive either, right? If you read the headlines from the perspective of a third party on the left, rather than the perspective of a Democrat or Republican, would they actually state something like this? Sanders should drop out because he has leverage over Clinton and may succeed in extracting concessions from her. And the media is nailing him. Because they know. If Sanders was not a threat, they just ignore him. Right? Near the end of the night now. It's about time to go to bed. And I'm reading some CBC commentary. CBC is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the state-run media in Canada. I'm kind of glad that they posted their write-up the way they did, so I can respond contextually in an appropriate way. You need to think of Hillary as the Liberals, and Sanders like the NDP, and then place them in a minority government, as we saw in the 60s, 70s, and 00s. And that's an arrangement that worked out very well in Canada in the 60s and 70s, especially the 60s. Lots of people think it was our greatest parliament. It gave us our immigration system. It gave us Social Security. It gave us health care. EI, the flag, and the national anthem. The flag and the national anthem actually even came out of it, right? Like, our country was decided in that period. And at the end of it, it gave us Pierre Trudeau, who wrote our Constitution. But the NDP would never just let the Liberals pass whatever they want. Okay, they always demanded some influence. And when they didn't get it, they'd vote down the budget. You ask a Canadian that was alive at the time, could you imagine David Lewis just getting in line behind Pierre Trudeau? They'd laugh at you. It's a hard game of difficult negotiations, but it's how the Parliament works. The American punditry is going to have a hard time with this because the three-party system is foreign to most living Americans. It shouldn't be, though. It did happen in the 30s. There was a socialist movement in the United States in the 30s. And they forced a set of concessions from FDR that is now called the New Deal. So, the media could call a history prof maybe and get them to explain it. But they don't have to do that. They can just call a Canadian. The thing is that what we're seeing unfold in the United States right now has not happened for 100 years, for a century. Okay, this is not politics as usual. You cannot understand what's going on with Sanders, what's going on through his head, through any sort of, comparison to anything in your lifetime. Only the oldest Americans have an understanding of what's happening right now. Okay, it's very different. The Canadian media is uniquely positioned to understand and explain it, and should really take the opportunity to. I have not seen the kinds of articles in the Canadian media that I'd like to see. They could explain this to the Americans in the way that we can, because we know it. It's a shame. But that ends my analysis of the California primary for the night anyways. It's time to get some sleep.